What's going on, podcast listeners? My name is Michael Chernow. I am a restaurateur and lifestyle entrepreneur, and I am truly obsessed with living a life better than yesterday through wellness, fitness, and good vibes. I've always wondered if the drive to succeed is something we are born with, or if it's something that is made over time through grit, drive, and perseverance. I get to answer that question exactly, and the goal of this podcast is to talk with people that have absolutely crushed it in life and have inspired me to do the same. This is Born or Made. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Born or Made podcast. I am excited to introduce our next guest, who has a pretty similar story to mine in terms of our business trajectory. His name is Josh Kopel. He is a restaurateur, an entrepreneur, and a podcaster himself. I actually was a guest on his podcast not too long ago, the Full Comp podcast. We had a really, really good time. He definitely knows how to ask a good question. And I hope that we can have a similar outcome on today's podcast. Josh, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike. Super happy to be here.
You know, you are a restaurateur, and I am a restaurateur. You're on the West Coast in California. I'm on the East Coast in New York. And I think before we dive into the Born or Made pathway, I'd like to talk about the time that we're in the world of restaurants right now, because it's obviously we're still dealing with a bunch of COVID stuff. We're dealing with really terrible social situations in the country, and our businesses are directly impacted by both of those things. And so I just wanted to get your opinion and sort of hear a little bit from you, how you have been navigating. Have you learned anything? Are you implementing anything new in your business?
Business is in the toilet for me, like it is for everyone else, which is unfortunate, but it's also an opportunity. What I see as the real opportunity here, being in the hospitality industry, is to be of service. It was through the pandemic that I started the podcast. It was through the pandemic that I started giving away the technology that I created for free. Now is the time to be of highest and best use. Kind of a tangential story for you. About 6 months ago, I was driving by a Chick-fil-A, and I'm not a huge fan of their politics. I am a huge fan of their chicken, though. But they had a sign out front, and it said, if you have a servant's heart, please apply. We're hiring. And I thought about it, and I thought to myself, I wonder how many people look at that sign and are just disgusted, right? Like, I'm not a servant. I don't have a servant's heart. But I read it, and I thought, if I wasn't already a restaurateur, I would love to work there. I have a servant's heart. I get that. That resonates with me. And in authentically having a servant's heart, and having had that from the day I was born, I saw this as an opportunity to give back in a big way, and not just to the people within my community, but to the industry at large, which Lord knows it could use some help.
I think it was very interesting how you told us that story. I think you've almost already answered the question whether you're born or made. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Can you just give us a quick synopsis of who you are and where you're at right now?
For sure. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I moved out to LA at 20 years old. The idea was that I was going to find a cool concept in LA and bring it back to Baton Rouge. And after being out here about 5 years, what I saw was that LA could use a little Baton Rouge. It could use a little hospitality. This was in the early 2000s. It was at the peak of Hollywood nightlife. I was running like big clubs in Hollywood, and they were anything but hospitable. When the crash of 2008 hit, I saw it as an opportunity to pivot into my own concept. I opened a bar in 2010 called 504 in Hollywood on Hollywood Boulevard. It was a New Orleans dive bar. It was everything I had grown up with and everything that I loved. And it was a hit. It was a huge hit. How many people in hospitality can say that their business made money literally from the day it opened? And 4 or 5 years later, I decided I wanted to get into fine dining. I mean, how hard could that be, right?
Go from Louisiana Baton Rouge dive bar to fine dining.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, it kicked the shit out of me. I mean, from the day it opened, expectations were high because people really liked what we were doing in Hollywood. And if we were going to do fine dining, the expectation is that we were going to do it well. And we didn't. We definitely did not do it well. I spent a year apologizing every night, and the goal used to be, to make money, to create this prolific concept. But with Preux Proper, I spent all of my time like just trying to get through one dinner service without a disaster. It was a super humbling experience. It wasn't the first time I had failed, but it was the first time I had created something where I failed on a daily basis. So I started with the basics. I turned to my business partner, who was also my best friend and financier, and I said, I'm going to fire the general manager and the executive chef, and I'm going to start fresh. And if things aren't different in 60 days, we're just going to shut it down. Because I didn't know what else to do other than to be true to self. So I took over as GM, and I hired an executive chef by the name of Sammy Mansour. Young guy, really talented, central focus on Southern culture, sustainability, and we killed it. And we spent the next year apologizing for all the terrible work that I had done independently the first year, but by the third year, everyone had forgotten and we were making money. After that, we decided to move into the fast casual market. We opened South City Fried Chicken. That did well, but I just don't enjoy that tier of dining. And so we ended up getting out of that about a year and a half later. And then that brings us to, the apocalypse that we are in now and the pivots that came out of that.
What did you learn from going to the bar business, which we all know is as difficult as the restaurant business? It's a kind of a whole slew of different types of headaches, though you could potentially make more money in the bar business without a doubt than in the restaurant business. But what did you learn from going to the bar business to the restaurant business?
That if you don't like it, don't do it, because the margins are terrible. Mm-hmm. So, what I loved about the bar business was creating experiences for people that you could, people could fall in love, people would bring first dates there, people would meet, and you could help encourage that relationship, and people celebrated their birthdays, and you were just an intrinsic part. And because of the type of bar it was, people went every day. So we were like an intrinsic part of people's lives. I wanted to own a bar where you could go by yourself and not be alone. That's how the bartenders were trained. It's like Cheers, and that's everything that I grew up with in the small town that I grew up in. And so I wanted that. That expectation is incredibly low. It's personalized. It's super special. But when you're charging $65 for a steak in fine dining, like the expectation is just different. So you have to hit all of the notes. You have to hit them in sequence, and it has to be perfection. And I had never built out an infrastructure where that was even possible. We were dancing on the bar to like Sweet Caroline at 3:00 in the morning, hoping the cops didn't shut us down. And now like it's about nuance. There's no nuance in a dive bar.
It's such an interesting pivot. I mean, what propelled you to want to go from that environment, which sounds like you were kind of killing it. Sounds like it wasn't that stressful because you were killing it and you were having a good time and you had this sort of loyal demographic of people that were coming in on a regular basis. Why did you decide to just take a plunge into like the Shark Tank?
Hubris. I wanted to own one concept in each tier of dining. What I wanted to do was be able to go on a podcast like this and be able to say, I killed every tier of dining that exists except for fast food, because fast food for the most part is trash. And and be able to tell people how awesome it is, how easy it is. And it's none of those things. It is awesome, but it's not easy. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I ended up having to take a huge step back because of it.
That's so interesting that was sort of your motivation. You really wanted to have like a diverse portfolio of different kinds of styles of dining. You said you got into the fast casual space and it wasn't your thing. Let's talk about that for a minute, because I know currently right now, I'm not in fast casual. I guess I would call the restaurants that I've launched probably mid casual, just because they're not counter service. They are full service dining establishments, but the check average is about $35. Fast casual is currently the sort of like, if you can nail it with fast casual, it's sort of like the golden goose, right? It's like, if you figure out a way to create a concept that resonates with a large group of people and is replicable and scalable, that's how you end up making money in the restaurant business. Why was it not your bag?
Because we weren't fast and we weren't particularly casual. It's the problem was, we were putting out probably the best chicken sandwiches money could buy, but we were seated in a food hall, and a fried chicken sandwich that takes 20 minutes to prepare is not a good fried chicken sandwich. No. Because it's the only metric that people are looking at. And in fine dining, you have all the time in the world to cook, right? Because you've got ambiance and you've got all of these things that distract, and people are sipping on cocktails that are in weird vessels, and they're interesting colors, and there are all of these things to distract from the fact that your food is taking a while. And we had made the commitment that we didn't want to make the food until you ordered it, and it was also really expensive food. It just like the fine dining restaurant was a scratch kitchen. This was a scratch kitchen as well. So instead of being able to run this type model where we open an hour before doors and we close an hour after doors, like we had a whole team in there prepping 6 hours before service.
In the fast casual?
Yeah. That's not how you make money.
No.
It's not, but that's how we make food. So we tried it. We tried to be pliable, but ultimately at the end of the day, it just didn't work. I couldn't make the food cheap enough, and I tried everything. But I couldn't make the food cheap enough and not offset labor was a huge issue for us. And it just couldn't be done fast enough in a way. We didn't want freezers. We didn't want heat lamps. We wanted everything to be super fresh. But the reality is, and I guess this is the simplistic answer, when you have an hour for lunch and it takes you 20 minutes to get there and 20 minutes to get back, and it takes me 20 minutes to make your food, you're going to be fucking pissed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's why we bowed out.
Did you guys just unwind the company, or did you sell it?
We sold the space, not the concept. Okay. So I was able to sublease the space and make back a little bit of the money, but we took a bath.
I think that's an interesting thing to discuss as well. I believe that losing is winning in many cases. I really do. I think I've learned the most in my life in the losses I've taken. And so I like to say a few things. I say learn to love the hard and the hurt, because I think that's so important, because if it doesn't hurt and it's not hard, chances are it's not going to be a super success. But I also say learn to lose to learn. And losing to learn is, I don't think it gets any more real than that. I think failing is something that I encourage as a leader and as an entrepreneur. I encourage it for myself. I encourage it for the people I work with. Failing is absolutely a massive part of the game, specifically in the beginning of your career, and even down the road, maybe, as you gain confidence and feel like you are kind of untouchable potentially, you tend to take bigger risks, and sometimes those risks don't work, right? I mean, I think that's a pretty common story. Why don't you just talk me through when you decided to pull the plug on the chicken concept and how that felt, and was it painful, and what did you learn from it?
So the chicken concept never netted out enough money to pay me, right? I never got a dividend from it, which means looking at it, it was a source of stress. It was a source of pain. It was something that I was continuously dumping money into. And basically, I was paying to work for free, right? And not only that, it's not like this was a concept that people adored, right? This wasn't a restaurant that people were like, oh my God, I can't live without it. Sure, I mean, we had huge advocates and people loved it and all of that. But for the most part, we were missing the mark. And so you look at it and you say, we're not accomplishing our goal with our guests. I'm paying to work for free. And this has absorbed 1.5 years of my life. What do we do here? And it just, at that point, it made sense to swallow my pride, to take the L and walk away. And, I think I was able to create the most lucrative or positive exit possible in that situation. But it all kind of speaks to the same thing. And I know you work out a lot, so I know you'll appreciate this. On that born or made thing, endurance is not something you're born with, right? It's something you develop over time. And resilience is not something you're born with. It's something that you can develop and hone over time. And so understanding that the obstacle is the path, and that regardless of what happens with this one little chicken shack in this food hall in downtown Los Angeles, that in no way encapsulates the totality of my career. It was just a choice, right? And so I can weight that choice heavily, or I can weight that choice lightly. And I can say, this was a choice I made. It wasn't a great choice. And so I'm choosing to make a different one. And the resilience required to do that, and to be able to turn to the staff, who, by the way, we were able to retain everyone, and we just rolled everyone into the fine dining restaurant. To have to turn to the staff and turn to the general public and turn to our people and say, that dog just won't hunt. It's humbling. But the more you do it, it's no different than negotiating, having conversations about money, strategic quitting. The more you do it, the easier it gets.
I think that is invaluable content and information, man. I think that if there is a business sort of venture or situation that you're in, and it is constantly dragging you down, there's zero positivity in it in terms of profit or just general gratification, so many people will just continue to bang their heads against the wall and stay in it and stay in it. And I think ego has a lot to do with that, right? Like your pride and your ego tend to stand in the way. I love the way you describe just, saying, well, that dog just won't hunt. And it doesn't make sense for us to hit the woods with that animal anymore. It just doesn't make sense. It's, and also being humble through it and saying, you know what, we made a choice. This choice was not a good choice. That's okay. We're going to make another choice so that the other stuff that we do is better. And I think a lot of people need to hear that. I think that just because you make a decision in business that didn't work out, changing your mind, obviously it costs money, right? But changing your mind is probably the best thing entrepreneurs do. I think it almost is what defines a great entrepreneur, the ability to change their mind and be open to new opportunities and new ideas, and not be afraid to go out there and do something different. If the path is overgrown and you can't find your way, I think that people really need to hear that, because I know a lot of people that'll stay in something, a relationship, a job, a business, because they feel like they have to, that people are going to judge them. And I believe that if they get judged, the people that are judging them suck anyway. So, you need the people that are going to be out there to support you. And so I believe surrounding yourself with the right people in those regards is really important. And it sounds like you've got a team of people around you that support you. And that's awesome. So I'm grateful that you're happy and willing to share stories like that. Even before we got on here, I said, "Is there anything you want me to stay away from?" And you said, "Absolutely not. I'm an open book." So that makes for a great story. Why don't we talk a little bit about your history, your past, your childhood? You've already sort of claimed that you were born with a servant's heart, and so I imagine that this life was sort of paved for you. Let's talk about it as early as you can remember.
I was always a strategic child, if that makes sense. My mother jokes that like when I was getting ready for school in the morning, I was so small that I was standing on a stool to brush my teeth. And she would walk by the bathroom and I would be talking to myself in the mirror. And I vividly remember those moments. And it's because I was preparing for what I was going to say at school that day. I was rehearsing. I was going to say, "Oh, hey, how's it going? What happened with this? Blah blah blah." And I've always been a very analytical person, and what I was trying to do was figure out, because I wasn't particularly popular, and because I was like this Jewish kid growing up in the deep South, I was trying to figure out how to blend. I practiced different kinds of struts and walks as a young child, trying to figure out what was me. And very little of who I am today I would take credit for. I would say that I am an amalgamation, a combination of everyone I have looked up to in my life. My values, my strategies, my techniques, they come from everyone from, my parents to Hemingway to Seth Godin, all over the place. And it's I've always been looking for mentorship. I've always had this zest for learning. And because of that, it's taken me all over the place. I had a clothing line for 3 years. And it's when I was running nightclubs in Hollywood, I saw that the only thing you really needed to like have a successful clothing line is to get the clothes on celebrities. This was the early 2000s, and I was like, well, I can do that. I know a bunch of celebrities, so I had them wear the clothes. I had the designer across the street from the nightclub make the clothes, and we ended up, in 400 doors nationwide in 8 countries, and licensing that helped to finance the bar. But I've always been pliable, whether we're talking about career, whether we're talking about my personal life. It also speaks to the moment we're in now with the racial injustice we see. And you brought up a great point that it's so important to be able to change your mind, right? To have the strength to say, you know what, I thought that, but I was wrong. I'm from the Deep South. People think differently there. And I can remember when gay marriage became legal in San Francisco. I can remember talking to a very close friend of mine from back home. And I told him, I said, I know it doesn't seem right to you now, but it's like a light switch. And once that switch gets flipped, you'll never be able to look at the world the same way again. And you'll wonder how you ever thought in a million years that it was okay to not allow two people that love each other to be able to spend their lives together. And I feel that way about so many moments in my life where this switch is flipped. And I've been enlightened through mentors and through people I don't even know, and just seeing their life's path through you and the choices you've made, which is why I reached out to you initially. I'm just a sponge, man.
Man, I share the exact same desire to be mentored and to learn. I'm not the guy necessarily that has read 1,000 books a year, and reads something and retains it all and is able to recite it back to people. However, I learn from people, and people have been my light through my life. Right, the light at the end of the tunnel has always come to me through people, and so mentorship I believe in at my core. And I think in the world of entrepreneurialism today, there's this really sort of like almost the term mentor, it almost sounds like it's something that is like an agreement, right? Like when you, like it's used a lot, right? My mentors. I don't believe that is typically the way the mentor-mentee relationship works. I think it's really an opportunity for just someone to check in with somebody on a somewhat regular basis, someone that they respect. And it's not like you ask them out on a date. I mean, I think I think that in some cases, maybe in a more formal setting, maybe in the world of finance, there's these mentors that will actually say, I'm going to mentor you. But in my experience and the experience of others that I've met over the years that have mentors, in and throughout their lives, it's just people that they aspire to, that they've been lucky enough to get a hold of and check in with on a semi-regular basis. And I would encourage anybody listening to this podcast to acquire some of those people and not make it weird, and not like, if there's somebody that you really want to get close to, writing a DM to somebody on social media and being like, hey, would you mentor me? That sounds like work to a very busy person. That sounds like an obligation that could potentially be arduous. But if you write a DM to somebody on social media and say, hey, I truly, truly love the content that you put out there. I'm gonna shoot you a note every once in a while just to let you know how I'm doing. Chances are, the more you do that, the opportunities will arise to get close to the people you want to get information from. And somebody just DM'd me actually, earlier today. Hey, how did you get Gary Vee on your podcast? And my answer back was, I'm a hustler. I figured out a way to do it that was not, that didn't seem like I was asking for him to work, and through his wine business and my restaurant business, I was able to figure out how to do it, and now I'm lucky enough to call Gary a friend, right? So it's very possible for people to get close to the people that they want to be close to. There's, like you said, strategy is a huge part of it. So you're born and raised in Louisiana. You feel a little out of the typical, stereotypical southern dude, Jewish guy growing up in the South. And so what was your relationship with your parents? How was school? What was that like?
I was a terrible student. I've only excelled at the things I've been interested in. School for me was a great social experiment. I learned how to make friends, and I evolved over time. I also had the luxury of having terrible skin in high school. And the only reason I say that is because if you are not attractive, you must be charming. If you're going to survive, you have to figure out how you're going to make it through the landscape of high school. And so having terrible acne, so I had terrible skin, and, and given the choice between being attractive, which wasn't an option at the time, and being charming and witty, I only had the option of charming and witty. So I honed my words, and I tried to be funny. And initially I wasn't at all.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up, what your relationship was like with your parents, what school was like as a kid? I'd love to learn about that.
I was really close with my parents growing up. My mother was just a really strong, amazing, powerful woman. She was the matriarch of the family. And my father was a traveling salesman focused on housewares. And I traveled on the road with him during the summer. So for 3 months straight, most summers, I would be out on the road with him as he would go to all of these small towns in Louisiana selling his wares. And it was such an amazing experience to watch him sell, because the big lesson learned there was, he said, if you sell yourself, they'll buy whatever you put in front of them. And there's so much truth to that, so much truth. And so I would watch him go in, and he was never selling. He was just building relationships. And as he'd walk through the store, he'd be like, oh, this and this would go really well in your store. And they would agree because he had taken the time to understand them. And what it did was it gave me sales chops really early on. and he would use me to help sell. I knew his pitch. He was selling this beautiful serving stuff called Wilton Armatel, and it's oven to table to freezer. And I would go through the whole thing, and it was amazing. And we were in this 1986 four-door Volvo, and we were going to Opelousas, Louisiana, and Leesville, and we'd go all the way out to Florida, which is like a 16-hour drive. And it was an amazing experience as a child. It was also like really, really great quality time with my dad. They've both been a real inspiration to me. Both have been employed and hard workers their whole life. My father always had an entrepreneurial spirit, but never either the courage or the convenience to do anything on his own. And I think that's probably where it came from for me. And then, you know, in terms of like education, high school and all that, I was a terrible student. I wasn't interested in formalized learning. High school was where I honed kind of who I wanted to be as a person. I was always telling jokes. They were always falling flat. Over time, I got progressively funnier and more charming. I had terrible skin. So I had decided that if I couldn't be attractive, I was going to be funny.
Do you remember making that decision? Like, do you actually remember, like, can you honestly say that you looked in the mirror and you said, well, if I'm not going to be able to get what I want through my looks, I'm going to use charm?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first day of high school, and Miss Landers was like the school guidance counselor. I went to an all boys preparatory school, 197 boys in my graduating class. And Miss Landers got up in front of the class and she said, whoever you were before today doesn't matter. Most of the people in this school don't know you. They have no idea what your background is, whether you were athletic or popular, none of that matters. You have the opportunity to start fresh. And I did. It didn't go over real well because, as I'm sure you can imagine, in an all boys, like super aggressive, deep South preparatory school, athleticism matters a lot more than wit. And typically, athleticism gets you like a really nice locker, and wit gets you pushed into one. So, right?
Uh-huh. Did you spend some time in some lockers?
Oh my God, yes, for sure. I tried sports here and there, but it was hyper competitive. At the time, I wasn't particularly athletic, and nor was I really into fitness or anything like that. But by my senior year, I had decided that was the path I wanted to go. So as a freshman in college, I took Miss Landers' advice again, and I decided that I was going to have a central focus on fitness and well-being. And I had decided by then that Baton Rouge wasn't the place for me. So I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew that like step one was to get out of college as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And so I got out in just under 4 years.
I believe that business cultivates two kinds of people in the world of leadership, right? There's leading with the iron fist and the P&L, and then there's leading with your heart and emotionally with a group of people. Where do you think you sit, if you agree with those two different styles of leaders? Where do you think you sit, and do you believe that one is better than the other?
I do. I think that it is more important to be inspirational and aspirational than it is anything else. If you hire well, if you hire people that don't have to be motivated, if you hire people that don't have to be managed, that are willing to self-manage and self-motivate, then all you're really doing all day long is telling them why they're doing what they're doing and why you're doing what you're doing. Carlos Santana said that there's nothing in the world more contagious than enthusiasm. And you're not going to find a truer statement out there. I was talking with a friend recently because, I've had projects outside of the restaurant really blossom in the midst of COVID. And he was like, how is it possible? And I said, it's possible through the power of belief. I create a distortion field around me with my enthusiasm and with my positivity. And it's really easy to get people involved in it because everyone's attracted to enthusiasm. The guy I was talking to was one of my first employees at the bar. And I was like, how did we end up being the most popular bar in Hollywood? Did I convince every citizen in Hollywood that that was the case? And the answer is no. I convinced the staff. I told them on the first day, it's the best job you'll ever have. It's the best bar in the city. And we're going to work every day to make those two statements true. And they bought in. And when they bought in, they sold it to everyone that stepped through that threshold. And then the bar becomes this huge distortion filter until eventually what I said manifests. What I said ends up being true. And that is why, yes, you can run it off the P&L. And I strongly recommend that everyone listening be fiscally responsible. But if your goal is to earn money, you are already fucked. You can only make money. You can only create money from nothing. When you look at that bar in Hollywood, there was nothing there. There had been 3 things in that spot in the last 5 years before I took it over. And I ran it for 10 years before I sold it for a profit. So it's not about earning money. It's about creating wealth. It's about creating money through experience, through emotion, and through enthusiasm. Did I sound like a self-help guy?
Yes, but I can't tell you how much I identify with that. You know, it's so funny when I opened up the meatball shop. My partner says this all the time. When we opened up the meatball shop, I had a bunch of people in there that were pretty new. I was more excited about hiring people that hadn't worked for a number of different places because I wanted to be able to teach them the meatball shop way as opposed to having to reteach them, their bad habits or course correct their bad habits. So I hired a bunch of green talent for the restaurant. And one of the first things I said to the whole entire staff was, I just want to let you guys know that we are in the coolest city in the world. We are in one of the coolest neighborhoods, if not the coolest neighborhood in the world. We happen to be on one of the coolest blocks in one of the coolest neighborhoods in the coolest city in the world. So what I'm here to tell you guys is we are working at the coolest restaurant in the world, period. And I broke it down like that because, and for these, and everybody was young for the most part and really excited to be part of something great. And I knew that using the word cool to them was going to really get them excited as opposed to using, this is the best or this is going to be the greatest. I wanted them to feel like they were working at a cool spot. And sure enough, that, like you said, that those words manifested, and ultimately, the meatball shop became, one of the biggest impacts that New York City had seen in years and years. Based on the culture that we were selling. I believe in culture more than anything else in business. I think culture,
sure.
I think it is the needle mover, and when I think also people have to be careful in the hiring process because you can surround yourself with really, really great people. Absolutely. I believe in that wholeheartedly with every cell in my body, surrounding yourself with people that are not only great at what they do, but better than you. The one thing I learned over time was making those people a partner can become a challenge because typically someone who's very, very smart analytically in terms of financials, legal, they're not going to think, actually they do not think the same way creative, inspirational, aspirational people think. They think very differently because they're much more logical. They don't believe in necessarily, there's not much like altruistic sort of thinking there. It's much more about like 1 + 1 = 2. That's pretty much it. And they are absolutely necessary, without a doubt. However, I believe that culture is the most important component. And if you don't have a culture that is positive, your chances of survival in a hyper competitive market like Los Angeles and New York City are very, very slim. Maybe it's a flash in the pan, but if your focus is on making money at its core, like you said, you're fucked. It does not work long term. Are there a couple of stories that you can share with us and or tips that you can share with us to sort of in a time like this, I think people have an opportunity to change, right? So any tips that you can give for people to sort of enhance their company culture?
Again, it all starts with the hiring process. You've got to hire based on values. I can train anyone to cook. I can train anyone to take an order. It's got to come down to, do they believe in what I believe on a base level? And if they're if they're bought in. So our line of questioning when it comes to hiring, it's questions like, like it's important to us that you have a zest for learning, because you're going to need to learn all aspects of the menu, right? So I can turn to you and say, hey, Mike, are you interested in learning about all the aspects of our menu? And you can be like, yeah, because I really want this fucking job. Mm-hmm. Or I can say, hey, man, what podcast do you listen to? Mm-hmm. And then it speaks to, I don't really listen to podcasts, right? Well, what do you listen to? How do you learn, right? Oh, well, I read Medium articles. Or, I'm not really into that kind of stuff. I like to play video games. Well, that might not be the right cultural fit for us. Mm-hmm. But it all starts with hiring. And then there's this huge indoctrination phase. For us, we've always said that our retention rate in the first 30 days is 50%. Our retention rate outside of that is like 99.99%.
Wow, that's great.
Either you're going to, but it's because either you're going to like what we do or not. We expect a lot of our people, and we push them hard. And, a great example, part of our company culture is that if you use it, you're responsible for it. So we have a 6,000 square foot, 2-story restaurant. We don't have a cleaning crew at night. The staff cleans the restaurant, and they clean the restaurant because it gives them respect for the tools that they use and the place that they work. It affords them an attention to detail that they would not otherwise have. And so it's things like that, implementing tools, techniques, strategies like that, as well as like creating a line of questioning that's going to help you vet who's best for your company, who shares your beliefs. I think is critical.
I just want to interrupt you for a sec. I think it's such an incredible tool that you give the staff for their lives to clean the restaurant. I've attempted to do that, and in the beginning it was hard because it wasn't something that I had thought about much. But as we grew, I started to notice that people really were not, though they were incredible staff members, people were definitely not cleaning up after themselves. And so we started implementing this, clean up the restaurant kind of environment. And it's so hard to implement after you've already started. If it's something that you can implement in the very, very beginning, it adds a layer of respect for the restaurant. It has nothing to do with cleaning. It really doesn't. You're going to pay no matter what. You're going to pay the staff to do it.
The money is negligible.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with paying people. It has to do with the idea, an invaluable set of skills that you can give to a team of people to say, respect your house as if it was your own house. And if you don't do your own laundry, and if you don't clean your own sheets, and if you leave your place a fucking mess, chances are you're not right for this environment or for this culture of people. And I love that. I think that's a great tool.
Other things that have worked really well for us, we have a zero tolerance policy on things like at Preux Proper, it's a dry house, which means you can't drink on shift and you can't drink off shift. No one can drink on site. We invest too much in our people to have them come in, have a couple of drinks, and make a bad decision. That's not the kind of culture we're trying to create. And so with things like tardiness, not showing up in uniform, not following the basic protocols, we have a zero tolerance policy, because those are not things that make you a responsible employee. Those are things that illustrate that you are a responsible person. And we only want to work with responsible people. So when we hire, we say, these are the baseline sets of expectations, not for you as a waiter, but for you as a man, for you as a human. This is how you'll function here. I'll never sit down with you and beg you to show up on time. I'll never say, please be ready for the beginning of your shift. Those are things you already know to do because you've been pre-vetted. And that took so much off of my plate. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely incredible.
I want to also comment on that. I think that is another totally invaluable tool and lesson to teach people that are coming up, launching their own businesses, and also people that are here listening that are employees within companies. You know, there is a prerequisite for working with other people, and that is do your job and do it well, right? Like that there's no BS about that. You know, if you're showing up late, you're just not doing your job, and you're certainly not doing it well. And I think as a leader, when you can sit in front of a group of people and they can see that you're a positive person and you genuinely care about them and you want everyone to succeed, and you lay out the law right away, it's just like, this is not going to be acceptable. I'm going to tell you with a smile on my face right now, it's not going to be acceptable. And when it happens and you break the rules, I'm going to also tell you, hey, this isn't going to work. And it should just be that simple. It's not about excuses. It's not about stories. It's not about anything. It's about, hey, like, if you genuinely have a problem, call us and let us know, and we'll figure out a way to work with you if you have a legitimate, viable situation. However, I'm not going to waste my time chasing you to be a responsible human being. And I think if us as leaders are not teaching people how to be better people, forgetting about better employees or better worker amongst workers, if we're not teaching people how to be better people, we are truly not doing our jobs as leaders. And I think, I couldn't agree more. Just sort of not having to chase people down, not having to write people up. You know, it's very simple. I mean, obviously you got to play. It's a tricky time, right? Like, there's a lot of people that are out there looking to sue people like you and I, unfortunately, for, you know, not taking the proper actions and you know, not potentially documenting every single step of the way, which has made work for us very difficult, right? Because, you know, if you lay down the law and the law is broken, you know, typically if somebody, you know, punches somebody in the face in a bar, that's against the law. If the cops come in and want to take that person away, there's not much that person can do. They're going to get taken away. And in the world of business today, if people break the rules or break the law, for whatever reason, there's this sense of entitlement from those people that they think that, you know, they're being mistreated or not fairly treated. And I think that's a whole nother podcast and conversation, but I agree with you wholeheartely. If you lay it out very kindly and nicely in the very beginning, and you say, hey, like, this is the deal, and I'm here to support and help you, you gotta support and help me. You know, I think that's also very, very important. So what happens when somebody shows up late to work?
They get written up. Mm-hmm. And they're, you know, basically there's a real simple conversation that happens after that. They get written up, they get one warning, and I say, listen, I like you. You do really good work here. Don't make me fire you for something stupid. And that's it. And we never have to have the conversation again, right? Because either they're going to show up late again and they're going to get fired and it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, or they're never going to show up late again. And that's not to say that they can't have a reason why. But it's, you know, my third point, which I think you've touched on many times in this talk, is, you know, you've got to invest in your people. And mentorship is important. It is important to be mentored, but it is also important to mentor. Mm-hmm. And you know, in New York, it's the same as in LA, in the way that most of the people that work for you have ambitions outside of the industry. Everyone is literally one solid audition away from telling you to go fuck yourself. Mm-hmm. And so either you ignore that fact and you try and force a square peg into a round hole, or you say, let's make a deal. Instead of becoming an employer and an employee, let's have a strategic partnership where when you clock in, you invest 100% of your energy into my dream. And the moment you clock out, I'll invest 100% of my energy into yours. And so in doing that, I've been able to help people further their music career or get the right agent or whatever they're trying to pursue, to go back to school. We've provided everything from loans to letters of recommendation to anything you can imagine, because I have been a great employee in the past and I've been a terrible employee in the past. And very little of that had to do with the person I was working for. Most of it had to do with wherever my internal motivations are. So what I try and do with a leader is I try and link up my motivations with theirs so that we're on the same path. Does that make sense?
Totally, man. That is beautiful. That is so awesome. I think that could be something that I certainly put into my philosophy going forward because, I think I've done that obviously, and I try to help out as many people as I can outside of the workplace with their own journey. But I love the way you said it. You clock in here and you put 100% of your energy into my dream, and when you clock out, I'll put 100% of my energy into yours. That is awesome. I mean, it sounds like you've really put culture at the forefront of your business, and I knew that about you. I knew that was something that I was excited to talk with you about today. I think that it is something that we as an industry need to start doing more. We are in a tough business, and we've been hit incredibly hard in the last 4 months. I mean, they're saying something like 20% of restaurants around the country are not going to reopen, and that's a lot of restaurants. We are the largest employer outside of hospitals and health right now in the world. We are the largest industry in terms of employment. So 20% is a big number. And there's a big number in New York City too, a huge number of restaurants that are not going to open. I mean, every day I hear about more and more people just giving the keys back, and it's crazy. I believe companies with great culture are always going to weather storms like this, because the people within the organization are not going to let it fall to the wayside. They are going to come and show up and do what they've got to do to make adjustments in their life if they believe in something with all their heart. And I think that's what it takes. Somebody said something to me recently. I asked them for a piece of advice, and she said, all it takes is all we've got. And I was just like, that is so true. In anything, all it takes is all you've got. Because if you're not giving it all you've got, you're not going to get what you want. It's just that simple. I believe in diversification, especially now. I've got my hands like you in a couple of different pots. But I could honestly say that everything that I get involved in, for the time that I am willing to allocate, I give it all I've got. And I would empower people to also do that. Before I let you go, I wanted to ask you a few questions. Any books that you've read along the way that have truly inspired you that you would like the listeners to take in?
Lessons in Service from Charlie Trotter was phenomenal for me. Setting the Table by Danny Meyer in terms of the restaurant industry. Those two books set my path a long time ago. Other great books, Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Love that book.
Oh my God, it's so good. It's a data-rich book that'll help you, really set the path by looking at the trajectory of other people. Principles by Ray Dalio. Fantastic book. It's like an encyclopedia. If you can get through a book that is that long, you are one step closer to having what it takes to be successful, because it is exhausting. Invested by Danielle Town. That book is about value investing. I read the book. I read a bunch of other books about investing, but that one beautifully distilled, how to make money in the stock market. I'm up 70% for the year.
What sort of advice would you like to leave us with today? Either advice that you've created on your own or advice that's been passed down to you that you pass on to others?
Here's a great piece of advice that was passed down to me. Because I'm sure your base is almost all entrepreneurs. Success is a mindset. It's not a feeling. And I say that because I have achieved a bunch of success in my life, and not a single day has passed where I felt successful. Success is not a feeling. I feel good some days. I feel bad some days. Have I achieved some success? Sure, but I always move the goalpost. I always want more. I always crave more. I I believe that I haven't reached my potential. I know some people peak in high school. I turned 41 this year, and I don't think I'm anywhere near peaking. And I don't think I will ever feel that sense of satisfaction, which is probably what's going to continue to push me forward. So if you're waiting to feel successful, to know that you are successful, you will probably be waiting a really long time. That's probably the best piece of advice.
I love that. 2 more questions. Last meal.
That's tough. There's this hole in the wall in LA called Roro's. It's Mediterranean. They do a chicken shawarma plate. And it's to die for. And I guess gun to my head, if that was going to be my last meal, I think I'd be really satisfied.
All right. So it's a meal at a restaurant. You're the first one to say that. Okay. Josh, are you born or are you made?
I was born with the inclination to succeed. And through trial and tribulation, I've been able to hone those skills. So I would say probably more made than born, but it would be impossible to discount one or the other.
You are not alone there, my friend. I don't think that there is a right answer here. I will say that if you believe you were born with something, though, you are born. However, I believe that every single human being on this planet is born with something. For some, it's sports. For some, it's fine art. For some, it's being able to sing and dance. For you, it's being able to creatively put people in a room together to bring ideas and vision to life. I think everybody is born with a thing. And as I've been doing this podcast, a bunch of episodes in now, when I first started, my thought was, oh man, but if people think that they're born, is that going to discourage others from getting after it? And what I've learned over all of these conversations is that almost everybody that's come on the podcast has mentioned the fact that they think that they were born with something, but they were made over time. And I agree with that. I think it is a combination, but I do think in my heart of hearts that everybody is born with something. And the journey in life is to try to find out what that thing is. And some people do and some people don't. But I think if this podcast can get people a little bit closer to understanding what their born is, then I've done my job.
I love what you're doing, and I think it's super important.
My man, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And why don't you tell everybody what your businesses are and where they can find you on social media?
I own Preux Proper, Michelin-rated fine dining restaurant in downtown LA. You can find us at preuxandproper.com. I own a restaurant services business called FLO Hospitality Solutions. We answer the phones, we do online chat, and we text message with busy restaurants. You can find that at justcallflo.com. And I host the Full Comp podcast, available on all platforms.
And social media?
At Josh Kopel on Instagram. Or you can check out my website, joshkopel.com.
My dude, you're the man. Keep crushing it. It's such a pleasure talking with you today. And I love success as a mindset, not a feeling. I think that's what's going to be the header of this podcast.
I love it.
Absolutely. I'm going to let you go. Get back to it. I'm sure you got a lot going on. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.